This is Tyler Prochazka, the features editor for Basic Income Earth Network's Basic Income News. I'm joined today by Victor Lau, who was the former head of the Green Party of Saskatchewan. And we're going to talk today a little bit about the politics behind basic income in Canada, as well as some of the environmental impacts. So, Victor, can you sort of explain what was your role in the Green Party and how did you promote basic income?
Yeah, it was a long time coming. I guess I was involved in the Green Party before I actually knew that they were deeply, or at least generally supportive of the basic income. But over time, I did find that most Greens around the world, Green parties have becoming a stronger core part of their program in supporting this basic income idea. And so it was a natural fit in terms of going from the New Democratic Party that I started out with into the Greens, which are more environmental based, as well as looking at kind of futuristic programming like the basic income.
And so, when you were the leader of the Green Party, was there any type of skepticism? I know that among, for example, far left, there's some skepticism about basic income that um, it's a right wing plot, I guess, so to speak. Well, did you ever get any of that
Mm-hmm.
kind of reaction?
Yeah, less so of that. I mean, I think even though generally people would say I come from the left, having started my first political party I joined was the New Democratic Party, the NDP. I just see it as it's interesting that the idea of basic income has that idea of being a very progressive idea, but also being a potentially libertarian idea, the idea of freeing up citizens to have more potential in their lives, more opportunity, more ability to do things that they want to do and not have to spend a lot of time doing things that they rather not do. And so inside my own party, the Provincial Greens in Saskatchewan, it wasn't a hard sell. I think possibly it's because Saskatchewan has the unique geographic location of being a province almost in the exact center of Canada. And because we have a history starting in the 1930s of kind of prairie populism that tended to lean to the left, but also kind of pulls back to the right. I think that there seemed to be that kind of comfortable coexistence with this idea coming from the Greens. I mean, certainly it from the left perspective, it is freeing people from kind of the drudgery and terrible aspects of the failed welfare state system that we currently have. And from the right, it's the idea of having government actually be kind of a smaller government that actually frees people to do what they want, basically gives them this income and then they go on with their lives kind of thing rather than managing their lives. And so that it's interesting how it pulls from both strands. And so I know under my leadership, I made it a core tenet that the party had to believe, kind of thing. And I tried to address any concerns. And there wasn't so much skepticism, other than I think one of the biggest questions has always been, well, how do you pay for it? Closer and closer to the idea that governments of any stripe generally can pay for it. Certainly it may be a smaller amount if your government revenue streams are smaller, but certainly if you have vast access to resources and business revenue and so on and so forth, you certainly can design your tax structures to implement a generous basic income. So yeah, it was good to see it, at least under and I think continuing under my next leader person, that the basic income is still going to be a core platform plank in the next election in 2020. So
What was the first instance where you ran into basic income, and what was your initial thought at the time?
yeah, it's funny. There's if you Google it, there's I think it was in 1994, 96. There's a kind of, I guess it was a semi-documentary film called Sex, Drugs, and Democracy, and it's about the Netherlands. And being kind of a radical socialist type of guy, I thought, well, I got to check this out, and I got it, I believe, from the library. And so I watched it, and it just obviously later on, growing up, I learned, it's kind of more I can't remember if I don't think I got to rewatch it, but I might have. But it's a hard film to get, but it's out there. I think you possibly can watch it on YouTube. But it was more of a propaganda film for the Netherlands, but it did try to say, in the best of light, that here's the Netherlands, where we have, decriminalized drugs, we have decriminalized prostitution, we have this basic income that frees citizens to do what they want. There's no coercion from the state. And years later at a BN conference, I met a person from the Netherlands, a professor, and I asked him about this, and he said, well, they do have a generous welfare state, but it is still a coercive, in the sense that in order to continue qualifying for your benefits, you have to do some volunteer work. So you don't have to do an actual job in the formal marketplace, but you do have to do something, childcare, or mowing a lawn for somebody. So there is still this coercive idea that you can't just get the money from the state as your citizen's entitlement and go on your way. So it was kind of, from there is, you get into the debunking of the whole film, where, obviously it was from one angle, but it did try, I guess it motivated me to really push now. And it's really exciting to see Canada almost at the forefront of this, to push my nation over a period of 20 some years to be more like the Netherlands, where we have more of a kind of, what do you call it, like a prevention basis instead of a war on drugs. The idea that it's a preventative health model. The idea of decriminalizing prostitution and drugs, and now we're seeing 3 provinces moving forward on this basic income idea. And I'm hoping after tonight's election in British Columbia, which is our most western province, that the Greens, if we can hold either balance of power or get enough seats to, push the legislature towards this idea, we'll start seeing, basic income start to, gravitate and get kind of a toehold there. And so I think if we get 4 provinces, so 1 or 2 more provinces on board with a guaranteed income or basic income, I think we'll just see it come right across the country. I mean, the 2 most largest provinces, Quebec and Ontario, are now going forward with this. So I think it's a matter of time before we get a few more provinces on board. But the more the Greens, I guess, can get seats at the provincial and federal level, I think this idea will come to pass, kind of thing, in a very fast period of time.
So can you go a little bit more into depth, if you could, about the various projects that are happening across Canada?
Yeah, it's the 3 provinces for sure, and I'll talk a bit about the West, where I'm based. But in PEI, I guess that would be almost Newfoundland probably the furthest, but PEI is part of the Atlantic provinces in the east, our east coast. So it's a tiny island of a province, but it's the province where Confederation began, where the country was formally constituted. And so it's a very lovely province. I love it. I'd love to retire there with my family, but they managed to get a Green elected, I think almost 2 or 3 years ago now, and the single Green. Here's an interesting story. During that campaign, where the Green won the 1 seat that they have there, he managed to bring this idea up, and all parties, the Liberal Party, which is the ruling party right now, the Progressive Conservative Party, which is generally like the opposition party, the NDP, which had at that time 1 seat, and the Greens, the Green Party, which had no seats at that time. All 4 parties running in that election all agreed at a debate that if they got elected as government, they would all move toward basic income. And so after that, the Greens tenaciously continue hounding the Liberal Premier to keep his promise. And with some support from the opposition benches, even though I think the NDP lost their 1 seat, they managed to basically get an all party agreement that they would lobby the federal government for funding to begin, ideally, a full pilot trial of all the residents of PEI. It just came back, I think, only 2 weeks ago from the national minister in charge of, I think it's like child welfare and welfare in general. Anyway, De Kloos, I think his name was, he basically said that they're willing to support it in most ways possible, but there was no mention of any funding from the national government. So they're kind of stymied. Like the legislature still wants to go forward, but now they're having to look for local resources to try and, basically do a pilot study or test of a smaller, amount of citizens. Maybe they'll do regional, and who knows, right? But it really it speaks to, if the Liberal Party, if there is any sense of, kind of cooperation within federal or provincial realm, they should, actually work together, maybe as a maritime, because I think all four provinces are run by Liberal premiers right now, and so really they should just work in cooperation, either as a joint lobby to get more federal funding on this idea, or just even do it themselves, in a four-way thing. So, but see, this is the difference between our parties and the other parties. The Greens really just want to work on, basically getting this idea done, right? So we work across parties. We don't really care who we work with. It's just a matter of getting the right details in and done. So that's PEI. Ontario is doing a 3-year trial. I think in a month or two, they've already announced the sites. They're still working on the Aboriginal site. So there'll be actually 4 test trial in the province of Ontario. And I think it's over 2,000 people. Maybe it's even I'm not sure if it's over, I think it's at least 2,000 right now. And then I'm not sure how many people from the First Nations reserve or area that they choose, how many people will be involved there. But they're going to pay, I think monthly, it's about over closer to 1,700 a month. And then if you're disabled, you get $500 on top of that. And I think it's more structured more like a negative income tax, where if you exceed a certain amount, you will get some taken off, but it won't be as drastic as the current welfare system. So I've heard different kind of numbers on that, but at least it's testing out to see if if it's worth doing or right across the province, either replacing welfare or moving toward that. And then Quebec is a weird place. You never really understand what the news is coming out of there because of probably translation, but it sounds like Quebec is moving towards just like, it's weird. They say, well, we're not even going to worry about a trial, we're just going to do it. But then they're not doing it for every citizen. They're doing it for something like 100,000 of their citizens. So that seems to me more of a trial, but then I don't know, like maybe they're just saying, they're going to do it for all these people, and then after 4 years or 2 years, if there's no real hiccups, then we'll just get rid of welfare and expand it to be a general basic income. So there's more details to come on that one, but it sounded more ambitious than what Ontario obviously is going, 2,000 people versus 100,000 people. But it still sounds like they're not just saying, this is going to work, we're just going to do it. It is in a sense a larger trial. And then you go into the West, where I guess Western provinces, there's a lot more skepticism and, kind of conservatism, which is ironic considering that the real 1970s trial of a real guaranteed income that worked was in Manitoba, Dauphin, Manitoba. And yet, the government is conservative right now, progressive conservative in Manitoba. And they're just not even, as far as I know, not even looking at it. Though I'm sure the Manitoba Greens are probably lobbying the premier to say, look, isn't this better than the current welfare system? Isn't it better? Wouldn't it save you money? That kind of thing. So, yeah, and then we go across to, places like Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC, and to various levels of support. Certainly as the Green movement are stronger, there's more of kind of a contingency to be able to lobby whoever's in power to try and get this done. Alberta, there was actually really hope there that Alberta would come on board, because the actual finance minister, Joe Ceci, I think is how you pronounce his name. Joe Ceci actually was a proponent when he was a city councillor of basic income. He was a big supporter of it, read books on it, and then he's now the finance minister of Alberta. But they've just since reverted to, I think, I believe I heard they made welfare slightly more generous under the New Democratic Party. And so yeah, I'm not totally sure how that's all going to work out in terms of, whether Alberta will eventually come forward or even try and, experiment with that. I certainly would love to see them, go forward and at least do a pilot project. Actually, big news though, I almost forgot, in my own province, speaking from the left and the right, it wasn't from the left who you'd think would naturally be more supportive. Saskatchewan being the home province of the CCF, the forerunner to the NDP, but is actually from the right. There was five recently in the news in the last 2 weeks. There was five major business groups, business associations. So there was the mining association. I think there was a farming association. Construction, that kind of thing. Anyway, they came up with a report called Transform Saskatchewan, and in that report, there is a major proponent and kind of I guess you could say, platform plank. I don't know how you phrase it, but they were actually advocating for a pilot project on the basic income. And I think they were actually even saying they should just move forward on this. There's this is coming from the business community. And that's incredible. I'm trying to get my hands on the actual reports to see, what exactly the angle is. Do they have numbers? But yeah, this is from the business side and not from the progressive left, which like I said, you'd think would be supportive of a basic income. But there's a lot of skepticism, I think, ironically, more from the left than from the right, in the sense that can people actually be seen to, take charge of their own lives, and I think it's a really sad shame that it's coming from the left and not from the right. The right seems to have moved somewhat past that, saying if this saves us money and actually works with precarious work positions, then let's move forward on this. Let's not waste any more time. At least to try a pilot program. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? You come up with solutions that actually work, and if it doesn't work, well, then you just revert back to what right? So yeah, sorry for the long answer. That's pretty much, I think, the wrap. The rundown anyway. Yeah.
And if you can get more information on the situation in Saskatchewan with that report, let us know if you wanna write something up on that.
Sure, for sure. Yeah.
So what are you hearing from average Canadians when you talk about basic income?
Yeah, I think the first time, I think, certainly let's go back 10 years ago. I think 10 years ago, it was still kind of a utopian idea and really laughed at, in the sense of two main things that I've always, I don't usually read pro basic income articles anymore. I tend to read negative basic income articles, meaning the skeptics, right? The ones that try and debunk basic income, saying, and 10 years ago, the two major concerns were, this is not a good idea because it'll lead to everyone being lazy, right? So the Protestant work ethic idea that everyone needs a job, that's what we need, a full, jobs economy, right? And then secondly, even if you could get past that Protestant work ethic to convince people that this is a good idea, people would still say, great idea, but how would you fund it? How could we possibly fund it? It's as if they can't grasp that this is just a restructuring of our once again, our government revenues, right? I mean, we can fund anything we want, right? Donald Trump is proving that. He continues to destroy good social programming and fund military, kind of expenditures to the hilt, right? So it's up to government and citizens, driving that government to do what the citizens want, ideally. So now you fast forward to 10 years, and because of the changing situation there, I think social media has helped a lot. I think a lot of people, older and younger, get a lot of their news from social media now. A lot of the mainstream press has fallen to the wayside. And so you get snippets on Facebook, on Twitter, LinkedIn even. And so you see people sharing and cross-sharing information. And when you see, a world view on basic income, that it's not just Canada doing these things, not just the Netherlands or France or other countries like Latin American countries and so on. So it's people start to believe they're not just isolated. It's not just a crazy idea that somebody's cooked up in this one nation. It's actually happening around the world. And if people actually get interested and do their own research and digging, they find that sometimes what the media reports is not really what's happening. I love I think it was the Swiss had that vote, and Oh, they kept saying only 24%. It was they were just annihilated. 70% rejected it. But I think his name is Eno Schmidt. The pro basic income campaigner. He actually said, well, part of the reason why they rejected it wasn't because they were against it. People after the vote, when polled, they said, well, it wouldn't be enough. Why would we do this, universal basic income for everyone when the amount is so low, right? So for a country to have this national referendum, I think it's incredible. They got 24%. That's almost a quarter of the population that voted, saying, yeah, we're actually in favor. And then the critics that didn't support it, that voted no, actually probably 10, 15% of them voted no because it's not enough. Like, raise the amount to a livable amount and I'll vote for it, So, and I love how, if that's his name, he said that, people think this is over. It's far from over. This is how the beginnings of getting the vote for women happened. They started out, they did the first test run, they failed. And people thought, well, that's the end of that. Women will never get the vote. And yet it came, after in the second and third referendums, right? So I think the momentum, and I've been following this and pushing this for over 20 years, maybe closer, almost 30 years now. But yeah, I think we're closer to actually getting it globally, not just in a few countries, but I think this is the fact that what is it called? The World Trade Forum. I think that's what it's, they're talking about it and stuff. I mean, it's with automation and the coming, more and more precarious work. I mean, it's like Elon Musk said, well, what else are we going to replace the funding mechanism for citizens with? Like if we don't share out what little work is left and give people a basic income, there just won't be enough spending power to keep the world economy going. So you'll just see economic collapse. And nobody's questioned them. Nobody said, oh, that's ridiculous, right? I mean, some people question whether or not the automation is going to come that fast in the next 10 or 15 years, but nobody's saying that it's not going to happen. It's just a matter of, is it going to happen that fast, or is it going to happen over 20, 40 years, right? So yeah, it's an incredible moment for all of us that are supportive of basic income to be alive and watching this, because it's so far it hasn't been too many setbacks. I think it's just been continuing. The momentum continues to get stronger and stronger every day, kind of thing.
So speaking of the funding issue for Canada broadly, where would the funding come from?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's I'll pick three lines. There literally it could be set up in many ways. And there's kind of two versions. I'll start there. There could be a version that could, and this is, I think, I keep thinking which one would be my preferred version, but I'm kind of a minimalist government kind of guy, even though I come from more the left side of things. I don't like big brother government. I just have a healthy skepticism of government using my taxes, government, protecting me and so on. I have a healthy distrust of government, I guess you could say, especially coming from the Green Party. But so there's the idea of a universal payout, and we do have a bit of a model like that, even though it's small, like in Alaska, where resources collected over a period of time could be put into a sovereign wealth fund, and then once it gets big enough, it could start doing a payout, and you could structure it just to be paid out annually instead of a 5-year averaging. You could just say, well, whatever it created. If this trust fund created $500 million divided over 34 million Canadians, you just pay that amount out. It's very small, obviously, or you could just structure it so that it's larger and the payout gets larger and larger every month and so on, right? Then there's the negative income tax idea, and I question whether it has to be an annual basis, where if your income falls below a certain threshold, you get topped up. So if our threshold is, say, $22,000 a year, if somehow whatever happens, your income drops, you're laid off, accident, divorce, whatever, your income would get topped up. Now, some say you still have to wait till the end of the year, but I think nowadays with technology and instant, kind of proof. I mean, if you got into a car accident and your employer said, well, yeah, obviously he's not working, he's in a body cast. Well, obviously the income dropped to zero. And so then, wouldn't there be an instant top up right away of a full amount to the base income level, right? I would think so. So, and then that would be, if you did it that way, it would theoretically, and probably fiscally be more affordable, where anybody above that threshold line of, say, $24,000 wouldn't get anything. But if your income ever dropped below that, you would get topped up instantly. So it would be universal in coverage, but not universal in usage. I'm still leaning towards structuring, if I had a chance, structuring something like more the Alaskan model, where you do get just a monthly or bi-weekly payout as a citizen's dividend kind of thing, and this is what you get. And as things improve, you obviously improve the payment. It never goes back. Ideally, you structure it so that it's such fiscally sound that you're always moving forward, ideally with inflation. And better times, you get better payouts and so on. But to address your other question, the three things I've heard talked in Canadian circles how to fund a basic income, one of the biggest ones right now is this carbon tax idea. And depending on how large we're talking about, probably we're talking about, probably 300, maybe even closer to $500 a ton, per carbon ton, and then you bring in so much revenue, you could then pay it all out, right? And so it's almost like a carbon fee dividend. So you bring in the money, you may take some of that money to offset, through various means, carbon emissions, investing in, kind of lowering emissions that way through clean tech and so on. But then a certain portion would be paid out, right? And it would make sense from a green perspective that way, because if you're a heavy carbon user, then you're going to be paying more. And ideally, one of the things that was thrown out, and we haven't had a chance to discuss it in our provincial Green Party, is the idea that we could, if we levied a high enough carbon tax, we could just eliminate provincial income tax. And I would suggest that not only do we eliminate provincial income tax, we levy it high, one notch higher. And not only do we, campaign in 2020 to eliminate provincial income tax, just levy a high enough carbon tax, but we're levying it at such a high amount that we would eliminate poverty at the same time, because we're giving everyone a universal income, no matter how we structure it, whether it's, the negative income tax or a flat payout. And I think that would capture people's imagination. It's like, wow, these guys are left, right? I don't know. I can't figure it out, right? And so there's the carbon tax idea. Then there's the fallback idea, which we kind of talked about in for us when I was leader in 2016. When asked about, well, how would you pay for it? We said, well, look, it's simple. We would just take the revenue and out of the personal income tax, adjustment. So we know so much revenue, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. I think it's 1/3 of the budget or more. It comes in through personal income taxes. So we would restructure that to then pay out a certain amount, probably starting small, 500 to 800 a month, but growing it over a 4-year term, so that by the end of the 4-year term, we might be closer to, maybe doubling that, 1,600, maybe even 2,000. I've read somewhere that, I think it was World Trade Organization, WTO or something, said that Canada theoretically, if done right, could afford for every citizen, man, woman, and child, 2,400 a month. So I'm thinking, and Ontario's version is pretty close to that, right? If they're sitting at 1,700 and then $500 top up for people on disability, well, that's pretty close to that 2,400 mark, right? So we're not far off. I think the numbers are getting closer. So carbon tax, or you could go through adjustment of the personal income tax, that revenue that you bring in, and then pay some of it back out. So really, there would be no, when they say, oh, but it would cost more. Well, no, it's the same amount of money coming in. You're just spending it differently. So if we're pulling in, let's say, $10 billion out of $16 billion in spending or something, we're pulling in $10 billion in personal revenue taxes. Well, you just restructure that $10 billion to pay out a certain amount to every citizen that needs it, or if you're a citizen, if you declare it that way, you just pay that amount out, and you wouldn't be pulling in any more or less. It would be balanced, right? It'd still be the $10 billion. You're just spending it differently. And then the third one that we're in Saskatchewan specifically, but certainly Canada too, we're pretty blessed with a vast amount of natural resources, right? So whether it's hydropower or potash, uranium, all these kind of necessary, minerals and mining, materials that people need around the world, we could levy, high taxation on that. Certainly our taxes in Saskatchewan are atrocious. I think it's below 10%. We literally give away uranium. I think new uranium mining, I think the corporate, or sorry, the what do they call it now? Basically the taxation on it is so low. I think it's around 5 or 6%. Like, other countries levy, from what I've heard, 50% or higher on their resource revenue taxes, right? So we're talking about 50%, 80% taxation. Norway, I think, is 100% on oil because they've monopolized their oil production, right? So that's why they have over $1 trillion in the bank right now. But here in Saskatchewan, we've got tons of resources, oil included, and yet we tax it at such a low threshold, supposedly to get the jobs. But then, the people in that sector are getting away, very, very wealthy, certainly high middle class lifestyle and incomes. And the rest of us, basically toil away at jobs that don't pay enough to survive in some cases. So you can see the inequity there, where if you just tax the revenue, the resources appropriately, Saskatchewan, as I campaigned, and I believe it's true, we could all be living high off the hog. There's only 1 million plus of us. We've never had more than that. And if we distributed the money through a guaranteed income, we'd all be better off. All of us would be secure. And yeah, maybe people wouldn't be making, 160,000 a year anymore. They'd only make, 80,000 or 90,000. But why would you need more? If you have 90,000 plus a guaranteed income, you're probably doing fine, So it's, so those are the three things I've heard in terms of how would you pay for it, is either through a carbon tax, personal income tax adjustments, or, resource revenue sharing. There's other ways, right? There could be a combination of all three. You could also restructure programming, especially if costs fall, as it should, right? Where there's less crime, there's less need for social programming. There's better outcomes for people. Then the government revenue should still be coming in, especially if the money through a basic income is just distributing in your local economy and getting taxed back. You should be able to balance off the books. No government should be going into deficit to fund a basic income. I just don't see how that would be the way to go, kind of thing. So.
And so you mentioned carbon tax. That leads me into the last area that I want to talk to you about, is the environmental impact of a basic income. I think so far the research that's been done has not really looked at how it changes behavior in a way that affects the environment. So I'm curious if you've thought about this question.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? I mean, it's interesting from my perspective, and I've had kind of a rethinking of the carbon tax. I certainly like the idea of neutralizing a lot of other taxes and moving toward, a carbon tax. I'd love to pay a super high carbon tax, even though I drive. My job currently right now is an organizer for my union. So I do a lot of driving to get to various places where I have to organize. And so I don't mind if they levy a very, very high, carbon tax to pay for various things, such as social programming, healthcare, education, rather than on income tax. In terms of the environmental kind of considerations, it is true. There was argument that it's like sin taxes. So if you're levying a high carbon tax in this case, what happens when people then start reducing their carbon usage, right? Starting to buy less of, or using, less carbon intensive ways of transportation and products and so on. Wouldn't that diminish your revenues? And I think over time, say 10, 15 years, it probably would. And then, but, a pragmatic government would then adjust for that, right? Ideally, you'd be putting money away once again into some kind of savings account or sovereign fund account, and adjusting your kind of budget expenditures to balance that off, right? You wouldn't just think this would go on forever. So it's kind of like I think Colorado right now with their marijuana taxation laws, the last 2 years have been booming, but is that going to continue? Probably not. Certainly over 10, 15 years, it's probably going to level off to a reasonable amount, but not continue to booming, especially as other jurisdictions go into legalization and there's more and more competition. And so this is why I think you have to look at more, a separate account, like a sovereign fund. And in terms of the environment, yeah, it's definitely something to grasp at. I mean, we campaign actually, ironically, as under my leadership, we campaign against a carbon tax because I always argued, well, it is just another form of taxation. It doesn't necessarily mean, you'd have to have a very high carbon tax. And that right now, Canada's only talking about moving in a carbon tax, say in 5 years' time, of $50 a ton. It's not even close to the $100 or $300 a ton that we were talking about. And if you're really going to kind of get people to take it seriously, you do have to bring in a very high one, I think, not just this minor one where people just kind of shrug and say, well, I'll pay it, it's fine. You have to have people really think about, wow, that product's really expensive because it's more carbon intensive. I'm not buying that, right? And yeah, so I think there's going to be a lot of discussion over next 5-10 years about carbon taxes and whether they're the way to go. Certainly, I think it sounds like our nation's going to try it, and they're going to impose one. Whether our province right now, my premier, who's a conservative, he's fighting it tooth and nail, but I think he's going to lose. Eventually there's no way to stop a national government from bringing in such a tax. It's a matter of if you can negotiate, and I think he would have been smart to negotiate rather than just refuse to negotiate, because then there's no room there, right? And he's going to be, the tax is going to be imposed whether he likes it or not. He might as well just give back the money, as I suggested, like if because they say they're going to levy it on Saskatchewan as a province, but not a penny leaves to the federal government. It'll just be rebated back to the provincial government to spend as they see fit. And I suggested, well, then why wouldn't we take that amount and divide it out equally among all, 1.7 million of us or something, and then we all get a small guaranteed income, small tidy sum. It would be more of an annual amount, I think, somewhere in the realm of, I think it was like $2,000 or something, but still, it's a nice, ability for all of us to get our carbon tax rebated back to us, and then we spend it accordingly, So I think that would be really neat to see that happen. I don't know. I'll have to keep you up to date on that and see if that is something that he'll consider, kind of thing. But yeah.
So I think Canada kind of gets overlooked because everybody's talking about Europe all the time. So and even I think I kind of underestimated how much is going on there. So I'm really excited to see how these various pilot programs turn out. I want to keep up with you. So Victor, it was really great having you on. I hope that we can have another time where we can kind of discuss more in depth these various pilot programs and your thoughts on the future of basic income in Saskatchewan and Canada. So thank you so much for talking with me today.
Oh yeah, thanks a lot, Tyler. Really appreciate it. It was great.